This is an episode about Hamilton the musical, and it is in particular about one of the main characters. The point is to give some deep backstory to the figure, and as I have promised, to never miss an opportunity to explore a crazy coincidence or a good ghost story along the way, and have we got some. This is our 6th episode of Hamilton, and this one is our ghost story, or rather, our monster story. There were plenty of crazy coincidences in this guy's life. It seemed like history was swirling around him as events in his life, and in world history, we're moving back and forth across continents and within huge countries, and they almost seemed to land on him in the middle of things that would make a statistician shake their head against the impossible odds that one person could walk into that many different major moments. What was the secret? Was it that he, like Hamilton, found himself orphaned with nothing but his wits and his drive to climb his way to the top of society? Was there a social climb for this man who rose from an entirely obscure and forgotten line of minor nobility into being a major international figure? No, that was all the unlikely deaths by the time he was 2. But he did seem to have an affability and hopefulness, almost an obliviousness to the fact that other people might not like him. That was part of his character, but it wasn't the thing that convinced many serious historians that he had raw courage, that he was someone who was just unafraid in the face of danger, who was willing to enter a fight that he probably couldn't win just for the sake of proving who he was. What convinced historians of that piece of this man's makeup? Well, the werewolf hunts, of course. This is about the hero of 2 worlds and his role in the most famous werewolf incident to that point in history and maybe ever. We will learn about the Marquis de Lafayette's role stalking the beast of Gavaldon in this episode of Theater, History, and Mysteries. I'm John Brushke, and you are listening to Theater, History, and Mysteries, where I take a musical theater production, go into a deep dive on the questions it raises and the answers it provides. I hope that this approach will give a deeper understanding about the lessons that the musical has for theater and for life, and I will never miss an opportunity to pursue any mystery, bizarre coincidence, improbable event, or supernatural suggestion along the way because, in the words of Dirk Gently, it is all connected. We are about to get going on this tale, but just a quick moment, let me take to thank you for listening. I am totally appreciative that you are lending me parts of your cranium to consider these thoughts I have. I hope you like musical theater. I hope you think these side trips are fun. And I just appreciate that you are taking the time to do it. If you like this, I do encourage you to try some of the back catalog. And if you're really taken with the show, like if this is giving you some pleasure, if you could please share it, put it on your social media, tell a friend about it. Those are the things that really help something like this grow. We are in the middle of our series on Hamilton, and this is episode number 6. The last one, episode number 5, we just talked about slavery. It was kind of deep and heavy, so we're going to take a little bit of a fun break here. In our next episode, we're going to talk a lot more about multiracial casting, and then there's more after that to say about the development of the show, the Schuyler sisters. We'll have at least 12 of these episodes, and that should get us all the way through August of 2026. And if you are listening after that, thank you for taking my encouragement to go into the back catalog. I feel like I'm time traveling here, but thank you for doing what I just asked you to do. Okay, our pattern has been to give supernatural stories some mention and maybe an episode and maybe some full treatment. This is going to be a little bit of a hybrid. This is our treatment of Hamilton and its best ghost story, and we're going to take it in 3 parts. The first one is the crazy events that happened to make the Marquis de Lafayette the Marquis, then the crazy things that happened involving the werewolves of France, and then finally, the entirely crazy thing that happens after Lafayette's life in the American Revolution. What happened to him after that? It's going to intersect other critical moments in history and, believe it or not, other musicals. Okay, part number 1, the Marquis and his rise to power, by which I mean, how did he end up being royalty? Now, my main source here is Laura Orricchio. Laura wrote a book called The Marquis Lafayette Reconsidered. It's an award-winning book. She served as the Dean of History at Fordham and some other posts, and she's currently at the Guggenheim Foundation. But this, much of this I'm just pulling out of there. And I will just start by saying the Marquis' given name is Gilbert. So he's Gilbert until he is named the Marquis. Let's figure out how that happened. Well, his family was noble but obscure. And in, those times of royalty, things went to the oldest male heir. And for a few generations, his side of that family tree had been on the second son kind of path. So they were the spare, not the heir. And if that happens to you for a couple generations, you don't have too much. Now, he grew up in a place called the Chateau de Chavanac. That is Chavinaic. And I'm just going to say all these French words. My pronunciation, I'm certain, is both approximate and incorrect, but I will spell those out for you, at least the first time that I butcher it. It was sort of intentionally medieval. In the early 1700s, it was rebuilt, and it wasn't rebuilt in a modern way. It was sort of built to preserve what it looked like before that. It is located in a place called Auvergne, Auvergne. That is 300 miles south of Paris. It is obscure, and worse than that, it is smelly. And that is according to English agronomist Arthur Young, who visited it and wrote these things about it, quote, Clermont, that's Clermont-Ferrand, which was the capital of Auvergne, forms one of the worst built, dirtiest, and most stinking places I have met with. There are many streets that can, for blackness, dirt, and ill sense, only be represented by narrow channels cut in a night dunghill. The contention of nauseous savors with which the air is impregnated when brisk mountain gales do not ventilate these excrementitious lanes made me envy the nerves of the good people who, for what I know, may be happy in them. Man, we have read reviews of people who hated Jesus Christ Superstar that were better than that. Let's just say I don't think everybody necessarily shared that view of how bad this place was, but by all accounts, it is not part of the capital. It's not part of the cutting edge of culture. It's rural. It is out there, and it's considered a little bit of a backwater. That is where all these events are going on. Now, Gilbert's dad is a second son, so the firstborn has to die. He accommodates this by, get this, he captures a prisoner, but fails to check him for weapons, and so then he starts leading him off on his horse, but the guy has a pistol that the firstborn has not figured out. The prisoner takes the pistol, shoots him, and that is how the firstborn of the family dies. But that just means the firstborn is dead, so the dad is still around. That would be Gilbert's grandfather, and now he has to die for anything to get inherited down to Gilbert. His grandfather actually made it to Versailles, so he'd managed to get himself a bit of a name. He gets to take part in a royal hunt, which is totally soft duty. You go out, you hunt something, you come back. But on the return trip, he falls off a horse, suffers a head injury that is pretty severe, and he lingers for a long time, maybe up to a year, with a mortal wound before he, too, finally dies in agony. That is a very unpleasant year. But now, both the father and the firstborn is dead. That leaves only the secondborn son now, who is Gilbert's dad. He marries a woman who's named Julie. She is at a convent, not really a mover and a shaker, but she's part of a really rich family. So the family is influential, but she is at this point not really showing any indication that she wants to be an important part of that. She's, like I said, from a convent, but she agrees to go to that smelly rural place to be with the dad of Gilbert. And that is no small sacrifice. Well, the dad now is married into this influential family. He gets to be a colonel in an elite group called the Grenadiers. And this is the highest rank that anybody in the family has ever held, which is great. But he goes into a battle with English. Those were skirmishing all the time, and is killed by a cannonball in the battle. Okay, so the male heir is now Gilbert's mom's brother, his uncle on his mom's side. His uncle on his dad's side is dead. His dad is dead. His dad's dad is dead. And the guy who's inheriting all the money is his mom's brother, but he too dies. And Gilbert is now the oldest surviving male heir, and he inherits all of his family's money. Gilbert's mom kind of steps it up, and she realizes that you can't leave a 2-year-old with all this ready cash and no influence. So she goes to court. He is set for life as long as his mom is able to maintain enough of a prominent position that nobody comes in and tries to swoop or push him out. And his mom apparently does so successfully. With her gone, he's now being raised by his grandmother, who is by all accounts an awesome person. And that is when the werewolves show up. We are at the second part of what we're going to talk about today. It's the beast of Gevaudan, and that is Gevaudan. Gevaudan is how I'm going to pronounce it. It's at least as close as I can get from the Google pronunciation guide. Okay, and here the main source is J. Smith, who wrote a book in 2011. It's called The Monsters, plural, of Gevaudan, and it was published by the Harvard University Press, which sort of gives you an indication of the stature of this publication. The story goes like this. On the last day of June in 1764, a 14-year-old named Jeannie Boulet, Geanne Boulet, Jeannie Boulet, was watching sheep or cattle on the eastern edge of Gevaudan and was attacked and killed. It was not much noticed, and there was not yet much of a pattern. But then on August 8th, a 15-year-old girl in the parish of Puy-Laurens, Puylaurens, also died. And at the end of the month, a 16-year-old boy near the Mercoire Forest, Mercoire Forest, also passes. Those are 3 children who have all met a fatal end. And then between September 1st and September 26th, it really kicks up. Quote, a string of 4 deadly attacks signaled the onset of a crisis in Gevaudan. One of these attacks claimed the first adult victim of the rampage, a 36-year-old woman in the parish of Arsneck, who fell to her assailant at sunset, only a few steps removed from the safety of her door. It's now on. There are active wolf attacks going on, or at least we are using the word beast. There are now armed posses that are looking for the beast by September. There is a captain named Jean-Baptiste Duhamel who took command and led some of the early hunts. By October, the beast had moved northwest. It is now a regional problem. And when Etienne Lafont, Lafont, an official in the province known as an intendant, played a central organizing role in getting some response to these attacks. And by December of 1764, there were attacks in Auvergne, which is, of course, the home of the Marquis de Lafayette. That is a short period of time. They start at the end of June, and by September, there are armed groups walking around trying to catch this thing. By November, it's gone regional, and there are regional officials getting involved. It's not just a local problem anymore. It's starting to get national attention. What was that creature? Well, according to Smith, they used the word monster, and at the time, that had the connotation of being both frightening and cruel. And that's what they were looking for, a beast that was not just a normal predator that you might encounter, but something that was bigger, maybe a crossbreed, maybe a hybrid, maybe something worse, that was not just something dangerous, but something that was cruel and maybe evil. Seriously, what is surely going to prove to be my favorite source during the making of all of these, the Encyclopedia of Vampires and Werewolves contains this passage describing the beast, taken from a poster that came out in 1764, quote, reddish brown with dark ridged stripe down the back. Resembles a wolf/hyena, but big as a donkey. Long gaping jaw, 6 claws, pointy upright ears, and a supple furry tail. Mobile like a cat's and can knock you over. Cry, more like horse neighing than wolf howling, end quote. I don't even know what that is, but it sounds scary, and it doesn't sound like anything I have seen before. The London Magazine had this description in 1765, quote, its teeth were most formidable. With its immense tail, it could deal swinging blows. It vaulted to tremendous heights and ran with supernatural speed. The stench of the brute was beyond description, end quote. Lorraine Boissonneau, that is Boissoneault, another French, very French name, is writing for the Smithsonian Magazine, no pop rag, and captured some other descriptions. Duhamel himself, remember, he's kind of the local soldier who's organizing those posses, said it was, quote, wide as a horse and red with a black stripe. According to some witnesses, quote, it could walk on its hind feet, and its hide could repel bullets, and it had fire in its eyes, and it came back from the dead more than once and had amazing leaping ability, end quote. Some said it was a lion or a lion hybrid with some other creature or a prehistoric holdover. Hyena is mentioned more than once, and maybe a hybrid of a hyena with something else. There is also an article in my second favorite source, the teen version of Skeptic magazine, that has reads like a graphic novel, and it reports that, quote, some said the creature's eyes glowed red, or that it walked on its hind legs, or that bullets couldn't stop it. It could apparently leap huge distances. Many witnesses said it was just too big and too deadly to be a normal wolf. Was it a werewolf? A monstrous hybrid with an exotic lion, or perhaps a hyena released in the French countryside? End quote. Well, Teen Skeptic magazine is posing those as questions, but the people knew. According to the Encyclopedia of Vampires or Werewolves, quote, the peasants became convinced that the beast was a werewolf sorcerer who would never be caught. One farmer claimed that he had seen it and heard it speak. End quote. I don't know what this thing is, but it's definitely not just your normal wolf, and it might be supernatural, or at least that was very much the feeling at the time. Okay, so everyone's trying to figure this thing out. We left our timeline in November, working with others. Lafayette starts bringing in professionals by November. Now, note that is only 4 months removed from the death of Jean Boulet, and already the death toll is high. All right, she is the first victim, but we are now in scores of people who've been killed by this creature. From Smith, quote, as the eminent French historian Emmanuel Leroy Ladurie has noted, the beast generated apocalyptic fears at a level unheard of on the national stage, end quote. This thing is running around killing people, and it is a major national issue. It has gone from an unnoticed death in the last day of June to apocalyptic fears unheard of at a national level by the start of the next year. In 1765, a pair of people, the Annavals, a father and son team, showed up claiming that they'd already killed 1,200 wolves. They are professional wolf hunters, and they're on the case, but that might not be enough. Lafayette said, quote, it was much bigger than a wolf, end quote, leading some to wonder whether or not the Annavals could take it down. They could not. They left. The national fervor had now reached Versailles. Louis XV sent his gun bearer and bodyguard, Francois Anton, out, and he is going to take care of the problem. And meanwhile, all this national attention is making heroes of the survivors. There is a story about a Jacques Portefaix, Portefaix, who's a young boy who's with some other kids. They get attacked, and the children fend the attack off with a bunch of pointy sticks, petards maybe. Louis XV was so taken with the story, he paid a reward to all the children, and he had that kid, Jacques Portefaix, educated at the king's personal expense. And there was Marie Jeanne, Geanne, Vallet, Vallet. Marie-Jeanne Vallet was attacked on August 11, 1765, but she managed to defend herself and got the name the Maiden of Gauvaudon. Today, there is a statue in her honor in the village of Albers in southern France. What did she do? She fought off the werewolf. The terror was real. There was national hysteria. Nobody traveled alone except for one 8-year-old boy, our Marquis de Lafayette. He fantasized about confronting the wolf himself, fighting it off, impressing the king, and proving his worth. He wandered off by himself, alone, and he tried to get the wolf to attack him. Did he tell anybody that that's what he was doing at the time? Probably not. But we do know that he did that, and we will find out how in just a little bit. Antoine, remember, he's the king's bodyguard that's been sent there by Louis XV, found a large wolf, killed it, declared the job to be over, and then returned the carcass to the king. The carcass was a little decomposed on arrival, brought some of that original smell with him. So no one was able really to examine that carcass once it got to Versailles, but the king said, I've already spent my money on this, and I already got this thing killed, so end of story. Maybe for the king, but not for Gavaldon. 2 months later, the killings continue, and there are another 30 to 35 victims that pile up. It will fall to a local farmer, a guy named Jean Chastel, who had served time previously for leading his men into a bog on a previous hunt. So he's part of the group that's out there hunting. He bumbles it up so badly, he ends up getting stuck in a bog with a bunch of people and is put in jail for it. But he brought down a large wolf with a bullet on June 19th, 1767, and that seems to have brought all the killings to an end. All right, this is the basic tale as it has been told and retold. A century later, in 1889, it was all compiled by the Abbé Pierre Pourchaire, Pourcher, Pourchaire, probably in the French, who, quote, reignited interest in the story of the beast of the Gavaldon by publishing an enormous tome in which he argued that the beast acted as an agent of divine will, end quote. That quote is from Smith. Now, according to Smith, this has been the focus of all the other writers right up until his own book was published in 2011. That is, the central question that everyone's been trying to answer is, what was the beast of Gavaldon? The peasants, in classic universal horror movie fashion, the peasants believe that it's a werewolf for sure. Other people have different theories, and modern theorists come up with everything, including that guy, Jean Chastel, who is credited with killing it, was actually himself a serial killer, or that he had trained the wolf to kill people independently, and then he killed that wolf as cover story to either stop the fact that he was a serial killer or that he had trained the wolf to kill other people. Smith takes that with a healthy dose of skepticism, but that just sort of shows the range. What is it? Maybe a werewolf, maybe a serial killer, maybe just a hyena or a lion that got lost from the zoo. But that's what writers wanted to know. What was the beast? From Smith, quote, the beast had to be a wolf or a wolf-dog hybrid. It had to have supernatural qualities. It had to be a psychotic human being or an animal trained by said psychotic. It had to be a surviving remnant from a prehistoric era, and so on. End quote. That's what people have been trying to figure out about this beast ever since it appeared in 1764 and its reign of terror stopped. Reign of terror, let's not use that for France. And its murderous spree ended in 1767. Okay, well, we will get to Smith's take later on what this thing really was, but let's pause for where we were when Lafayette was roaming that very same countryside trying to provoke the beast to attack him in the middle 1760s. Look, the killings were real. Whatever killed those people, the deaths were real. There really was some beast or beasts that was attacking, mauling, killing, and mutilating victims who were, according to Boissonneau, quote, almost exclusively women and children, end quote. Everyone at the time and up to a century later would accept that it was some unnatural creature related to, but certainly not a normal wolf, and that was probably either supernatural or driven by divine will or a literal werewolf or at least a lost monster from prehistoric times. Whatever it was, this was not a boating accident or a normal wolf attack. That's what everyone thought. And that is still what a lot of people think. Okay, we will trace back to Lafayette and his time with the werewolf, but where does Lafayette go from there? Well, with no werewolf killing to prove his worth, he arrives in Paris. He gets sort of a ceremonial military title by the age of 14. They give him a uniform and he gets to march around, but it's clearly just ceremonial. He has an arranged marriage that kind of starts when he is younger, but is completed by the age 17, but it actually works. The couple seem to be very happy, and they are going to travel with each other through some very, very trying times. He goes to a room where it happens, not that one, but a different one. He hates the British, Lafayette does, for killing his dad. So he goes to a dinner where some British people mock the Americans, and he is offended. If there is a way that Lafayette can join the American cause, that dinner party, it convinces him that that's where he is meant to be. Now, there was a plan to send some French officers to America, but that fell through, and the king actually issued an order forbidding French officers from doing so, and specifically mentioning Lafayette. Okay, so what does Lafayette do? He's like, look, man, if I'm not afraid of a werewolf, I'm not afraid of you. So he ignored that order, slipped out of the country under duress, paid all of his own expenses, and joins the American cause. He shows up and he fights. He does well, and he is actually part of that Battle of Monmouth, which we've heard a lot about in the show. Of course, that's the one where General Lee blows it, and John Lawrence challenges Lee to a duel. Hamilton is actually Lawrence's second and helps him negotiate out of actually shooting each other. In our past episode, we actually talked about the Battle of Monmouth and what really happened there. Anyway, Monmouth is the one where at the end of it, Lee and Washington are giving different accounts. Lee's saying it was Washington blew it. Washington is saying Lee blew it. The world picks Washington, and Lafayette is there for that fight. He does well there in other places. And then in 1779, he takes a break. He goes to France, where he is, of course, immediately put on house arrest for defying the orders of the king. But that's all kind of for show. He's already a hero. The king kind of knows it. He has to do something just to save face, but he's a hero in France, and he takes his time to write his memoirs. And what does he write about? He writes about the beast/werewolf of Gevaudan. When he's asked, remember your childhood, what do you remember? He says, I remember wanting more than anything else to confront the beast of Gevaudan so that I can attack it and kill it. Now, he starts writing his memoirs at this point. That's definitely a key element. It's kind of brief the first time, but he spends a long time writing and rewriting his memoirs, and that story only grows in time as he continues to edit his memoirs. Okay, so while on the break, he writes about the beast of Gevaudan, but then he goes back to the U.S. in 1780. The colonial effort is flagging, and he's welcomed as a hero. In fact, he is so popular that Washington asks him to write to the Congress to ask for money because the war effort needs some help. It needs more resources. Washington says, hey, you're the most popular guy in town. Can you ask for it? But he can't spell all that well because, English is not his first language. So his spell checker is, say it with me, Alexander Hamilton. The two of them petition the Congress. They don't really get what they want, but their paths continue to cross. The war turns at Yorktown, and Yorktown is where there's a siege going on. There are these things called redoubts that the British hold, and they need to be taken. So the orders come out. You have to take these two redoubts. Lafayette is assigned to attack number 9. Hamilton is ordered to attack number 10. They do so with hand-to-hand combat. They both win. The redoubts fall into American hands, and that is sort of that battle writ large. And those fights in particular are critical in turning the cause to the Americans. The British eventually lose and move out a couple of years later. Okay, the Americans are over, we've won, and he bounces around but that ends in the early 1780s. He now bounces around as a diplomat and a hero until the French Revolution. Okay, the French Revolution, broadly speaking, the events are happening in the late 1780s. They'll hit a peak in the mid 1790s, and they will all fall apart by 1800 when Napoleon will take over. Lafayette gets back, and he serves mostly in the Parisian National Guard. And sort of the way it goes with that government changing hands so many times between 1789 and 1800 is if you die early enough, then you're a hero. But if you live long enough, you will definitely be turned into a villain because the revolution keeps moving back and forth. And even the people that are the heroes of the revolution in the early 1790s are the first ones on the guillotine. In the mid 1790s, the king is supposed to stay in Paris because it would be awful for him to abandon the people by leaving town. But then he is eventually beheaded by those same people while staying in Paris. It's a confusing time, and power shifts hands a bunch, and the ideology keeps shifting. And so, whether or not you're a hero or villain really has less to do with whether or not your positions have changed and more to do with who's in power that week. And, I will once again mention the name Mike Duncan in his Revolutions podcast. He's got more than 100 episodes describing that. I have very, very much enjoyed listening to them. If you want a deeper dive, you can do that. But into that mess walks Lafayette. Now, there is a showdown where there's a mob that wants to kill the royal family, and they have to make this big appearance on a balcony to address the crowd. They have to send the kids back inside because it's not safe. But Marie Antoinette actually stands her ground against this hostile mob. Lafayette kisses her hand, and the crowd cheers. That escapes the moment But as the political winds continue to swirl and the politics of the revolution change, there then are lots of pornographic images of Marie Antoinette and the Marquis de Lafayette. And in fact, in Auricio's book, there are reprints of the images that were appearing in the newspapers. They, would make the Epstein files. If there was a 1790s Epstein files, it was them. Anyway, it does not eventually help Lafayette to be associated with Marie Antoinette when Marie Antoinette gets beheaded. But he lives through it, and basically he's trying to restore order. He is popular at the start for trying to keep order. Then he gets some points for trying to protect the king from a group of angry nobles, although it's this weird thing where the nobles are going to try to kidnap the king and the people want the king and they think the king's on their side, but of course he isn't. But the fact that Lafayette protects the king from the angry renegade nobles wins some points at some points, but eventually, of course, that king is beheaded. So you now no longer score any points for maintaining order and protecting the king. You are viewed as a royalist sellout. Now, one of the totally nuts things about the French Revolution was there was both a civil war going on, as there was a new Republican government that was trying to get rid of the monarchists, and there was a fight going on with that. There was a separate fight that broke out with people that were Catholic and loyal to the king. And there were also foreign wars going on simultaneously. So Lafayette is at Paris. He realizes that the revolutionaries have gone too far, and this reign of terror is obviously stupid. He tries rallying people, looks around, nobody comes with him, and he realizes, I am not going to win this fight. So he skips Paris to what is relatively safer, which is fighting a war against a foreign power. There are a complicated series of arrests, but eventually he's in prison. But there is an escape organized. Are you ready for crazy historical confluence? I don't know, 2 or 3. Like Hamilton is a spell checker. He and Hamilton fight together at Yorktown. Here's number 3. While he is in prison, there is an escape attempt, which is organized by, I want you to guess, who could it be? Just come up with 2 or 3 names in your head. There's no way to get this right if you don't already know it, but just how unlikely this is. The escape attempt is organized by Angelical Schuyler Church and her husband, John Barker Church, who is now a British member of parliament and who, of course, also served in the Continental Army. She is Alexander Hamilton's sister-in-law, and her sister, in fact, is Eliza, and she is on the continent trying to get Lafayette out. And it works. He escapes, but he gets lost and he is recaptured. He gets thrown in prison for a chunk of time, like 5-ish years. He is eventually reunited with his family in captivity. So he's kept under some harsh conditions, but eventually his family gets to visit him. And he is eventually released due to the actions of a young, scrappy, and hungry officer named Napoleon Bonaparte. That Napoleon, you've heard of that guy. But having been released, he will not swear loyalty to France. So they seize all of his stuff. And by his stuff, I mean his entire fortune in France, which is a whole bunch of money and a bunch of estates. It has now been taken by the French government. But it's also the late 1790s, and as we learned in past episodes, France is now dangerously close to war with the United States. You know why? Because Alexander Hamilton will not back France in the budding France-English War. So even though Hamilton and Lafayette fought side by side in the Battle of Yorktown, now that France needs the help of the United States in their war against England, he won't do it. But, France has also imprisoned Lafayette, so not exactly a clean side to take in that fight. Anyway, the hero of 2 worlds is now welcome in neither one. His citizenship status is actually unclear. He was born in France, but under a government that doesn't exist anymore. He is welcome in the United States, but there isn't really U.S. citizenship, nor is there really French citizenship when he was born. Anyway, he's an immigrant, sure, but he's got visa troubles. But more than that, he's a political figure, and he's not welcome in the United States, and he's not welcome in France either. Eventually, he gets to Paris, but he has to agree not to do anything, like no politics, no military thing. And he is so on the outs that when George Washington died in 1799, Napoleon held a service for Washington, and it was expected, you might expect, in fact, it seems normal that Lafayette would give the eulogy, but he is not invited, and there's no mention of Lafayette made at all. All right. So you're fighting in the American Revolution. You were a hero in the 1780s. You were in the middle of the French Revolution in the early 1790s. And by 1800, you are persona non grata. But he serves his role. He does nothing between about 1800 and about 1814. But by 1814, Napoleon is out. And Lafayette actually negotiates an opportunity for Napoleon to leave France and get to America. But as we know, that deal falls through. The British block it. Napoleon ends up on the island of Elba and eventually makes a brief comeback and then loses at Waterloo. All right, Napoleon is now out. So the guy who hates Lafayette is gone. The French Revolution is gone. So between 1815 and about 1824, he is now back in the game, but sort of as a minor politician and, as it turns out, a really bad conspiracist. He supports a whole bunch of failed conspiracies in this 10-year period. That gets us to 1825. It's now the 50th centennial of the U.S., of the creation of the United States, and he's invited back. And he does the grand tour and is greeted with the openest of all possible open arms. Every city that he goes to tries to outdo themselves by throwing him a party. Like they're throwing the biggest party. He gets a hero's welcome when he goes back to the United States in 1825. He's not welcome there when he was in captivity in the 1790s. But by 1825, he returns as a hero. The second time he's arrived in the United States and they've given him a hero's welcome. In 1830, he's now back in France and he opposes Charles X. And he has a seat in the legislature of the moment. That's all I'm going to call it. There is some legislative body, but they change so often between 1800 and the 1890s that I can't keep it straight anyway. He helps in a revolution against Charles. In 1830, he's part of the revolution. It succeeds. He is offered the role of the ruler of France, and he turns it down to bring in Louis Philippe. And if you have not done so, I would go, if you're interested in learning more about Louis Philippe, that guy played a key role in the life of Victor Hugo, who is, of course, the author of Les Mis and an important part of his seances. It is Victor Hugo claimed to meet Louis Philippe in a seance where Louis Philippe apologizes. Anyway, that's totally nuts. But the guy who brings Louis Philippe to power is Lafayette. He is again made the head of the National Guard, which is quickly dissolved within months. Louis Philippe promises to do a bunch of good stuff, and then he immediately reneges, does a bunch of bad stuff, and part of that is dissolving the National Guard. So he goes from opposing the Charles X to actually being offered sort of the role of emperor himself, turning it down to bring in a monarch that he thinks will do good things. That monarch sells him out. He's part of the National Guard, and then out of it all in 1830. And oh my God, in 1832, he is a pallbearer for Lamarck. If you have not heard the entire series on Les Mis, I strongly encourage you to do it. I love talking about it. There's all kinds of fascinating history. But the death of Lamarck caused the June revolts. And Lamarck is a popular general. His funeral happens. Lafayette is one of the pallbearers. And that causes a minor uprising where there's some barricades thrown up. They're quickly crushed. It's not even a couple weeks before the government crushes this revolution. But in the place at that time is Victor Hugo, who walks past it and just kind of notices what's going on. And that episode is the barricade scene that ends Les Mis. It plays a major role in the book. And it is, of course, the closing part of the musical. And Lafayette was there when Victor Hugo saw that procession and saw the start of that June Rebellion. Okay, so that's 1832. On 1834, he gives his last speech in the legislative body of the moment, and then he dies of pneumonia. He's buried next to his wife in France, but he has some soil from Bunker Hill retrieved from the United States and sprinkled on his grave by his son, who he has named Georges, Georges, Washington. In the United States, he is mourned by President Jackson. There's actually 30 days of mourning in the United States upon his death, where the Congress wears black in honor of the death of Lafayette. Whew. Okay, so let's just trace that life cycle. He is the hero of two worlds. He's part of a successful American Revolution and a successful French Revolution, all within about a decade and a half. But that ends with him being thrown in prison, where he is kept for 5 years, and then he spends the next 15 years under house arrest. So from the hero of two worlds to prison for about 20 years, returns to the United States as a hero and returns to France, where he's almost made its ruler, but declines it, directly leads to the ascension of Louis Philippe to power, and is present at the June revolts that led to the event, which becomes the seminal part of Les Miserables. But how do we know about his courage? What is it that historians point to that identify Lafayette as a courageous human, as someone who can face challenge? Well, on 3 different occasions, current Guggenheim Fellow and former Fordham Dean Auricchio mentions that it was his desire to hunt werewolves that gave us the clue to his character. Okay, so let's just round this off. What was that beast? What was the beast of Galveston? Was it really a werewolf? Well, Smith makes the probably valid point that it was maybe not a supernatural entity. It probably was just a pack of wolves. And a point that Smith makes convincingly is that wolf attacks were really, really common. Like, there were thousands of deaths by wolf attacks in France, and especially in the rural parts of France at that time. And there were rabid wolf attacks, so that wasn't even that unusual. There's some mention that it's like a wolf dog hybrid, but that seems to me like that would just make a smaller wolf. So I'm not fully convinced by that. But yes, fine. Smith thinks that it was a bad time for wolves. It was sort of a drought, famine-y time in France. The economy wasn't doing well. The war was taking a toll. That made it hard on everybody, including the wolves. So they had to get more aggressive, and their attacks on humans ramped up, and that explains those attacks. What is more interesting to Smith is the cultural factors that are driving the story. For Smith, that includes the fact that France was in a pretty bad state after 7 years of war. And so various soldiers were wanting to do something heroic to regain the status. So when you put a big bad out there, like there's this monstrous wolf that is terrorizing the countryside, do we have a hero who can step up to it? Lots of French soldiers were willing to do that. There was also the point, makes Smith, that at the time Louis XV was censoring any discussion of politics, the war efforts were not going well. The nation of France was not doing well. So he did not want the press talking about politics. But the press was now, there was now a printing press. It was a major thing that people could read. There was literacy, pamphlets were out there. So what were all the newspapers going to write about? Well, you had a werewolf to write about. That certainly made for some National Enquirer style news of the day. And so that created it. And what is legitimately interesting from a historical perspective is that this was one of the first mass panic events that was fueled by what is something like modern media. The first time there was like a thing that was like the press, before the printing press, there wasn't a press. Before there was literacy, before there were newspapers, but all that was established and they needed something to write about. And this is one of the very first times there was a big supernatural thing. If you were to look at London or England and say, hey, what was your first big major tabloid style news thing? You would say Jack the Ripper. And if you were to look at France, you would say the Beast of Galveston. Anyway, that's what Smith thinks it was. The peasants at the time were convinced it was a magic werewolf. I want to believe the peasants, maybe Smith's got a point. Anyway, that rounds it out. That does it for us today. That is the backstory on one key character of the musical, and it walks through the rest of their lives. The intersections between Lafayette and Hamilton, as they are portrayed in the musical, are pretty accurate. They were definitely great soldiers. They definitely fought together. And they definitely both had a role in the victory of the American Revolution. What I find fascinating is that as Lafayette's life went on, it got more interesting, more crazy, more absurd, and had more strange crisscrossing intersections with Alexander Hamilton than you might expect. That probably shouldn't have been in the show. It would have, hey, let's go to Lafayette's escape from prison with Angelica. That's just too much of a side quest to put in a show about Hamilton, but isn't that fun to know about? I love knowing about that. So there have been some crazy connections. This has also satiated our side quest into the supernatural story, and hopefully it's made a fun walk between some of the crazy connections between not just Hamilton and Lafayette, but between the other great French musical, Les Miserables, in Hamilton. Also, I will just say, part of the French Revolution is the Paris Commune, and that plays a significant role in the Phantom of the Opera. Lafayette did not live long enough to see the Paris Commune, but definitely was part and parcel of the events that led to the Paris Commune. Okay, next time we will take up what is maybe one of the central parts of the show, and definitely something that's received the most commentary, and that is the multiracial casting that is part of it. Just as a precursor, I like it. I think it does some good stuff, and it definitely has me thinking about things in a different way. But that is not the only opinion. There's a lot of people who have a lot of thoughts about that, and we will explore all of them in our next episode of Theater, History, and Mysteries.